Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I thought it was time for another trip report video. As usual, I've got to say, this isn't intended to encourage or condone any type of drug use. Obviously I can't tell you what to do with your own body, but just don't decide to take some drugs after watching some random spooky video, especially when they're potentially harmful like this one. Diphenhydramine, commonly known as DPH, is a popular antihistamine used in many over-the-counter medicines for the treatment of allergies, colds and insomnia. At low doses it has a mildly sedative effect, but its easy availability has often led to people using it as a recreational drug. Higher than recommended doses can cause strange hallucinations, and as with all hallucinogens, there's always that chance that you're going to be plunged into a nightmare world of terrifying delirium. I've looked through Erowid for some of the scariest trip reports that I could find. These are really bad DPH trips. This one was written by Jason and is titled Deeply Disturbing, an experience with diphenhydramine. I'm going to describe one of the most disturbing experiences of my life and of my family's following a very high dosage of diphenhydramine. It started late one night. I was bored and wanted to get high off something. I was feeling depressed and had no access to any other drugs. I had a lot of experience with psychedelics, so I thought it would be fun to explore a diphenhydramine trip. This was a big mistake. I was alone in my room around 11 o'clock when my family were in bed. I had one full bottle of diphenhydramine and I took 1 gram. 12 o'clock, an hour later, I was feeling very sedated. I started having mild hallucinations. All the lights were off in my room and I could see the silhouette of objects starting to form in thin air, though I couldn't ascertain what they were. I also started seeing clear spiders form on my bed, which I didn't like because there are brown recluse spiders in my house and I couldn't tell if they were real or not, so I turned on the lights. 12:30. This is when my memory went completely blank. I don't remember a thing about the trip during the night, but I know now that I was awake the whole time because of the shape my room was in the morning. 7 AM. This is when things got really scary. I came back to awareness with my mom talking to me on my bed. I could feel I was very intoxicated, but I didn't remember what I took. My mom was very close to my face and looking at me very strangely. Finally, she asked me what I was on. I told her nothing, but my mental state and my body language were very revealing. Being in the middle of a very intense trip and having my mom aggressively questioning me and giving me very suspicious and threatening looks sent me into a state of paranoia that eventually evolved into a full-blown paranoid psychotic state. 8 AM. At this point my whole house was aware that I was in an altered state. I was in a state of sheer terror as everyone around me was questioning me and staring at me. I was so wired up with fear, paranoia and disorganized thoughts that my eyelids were pried open, receding nearly into my eye sockets, giving me a psychotic look. My brother, who had seen a lot of psychotic and schizophrenic people while he was homeless, said that I had the classic look in my eyes and face of someone suffering from schizophrenia. A look of terror and complete confusion. Accompanied by the insane look in my eyes, I was having paranoid auditory hallucinations of voices and disorganized speech and thought processes. 8 to 9 AM. At this point I felt nearly brain dead. My short-term memory was completely gone. I would begin a sentence and then completely forget what I was talking about. Or one of my family members would ask me something and I would start answering it and then forget what they had asked. Even worse, I was having vivid auditory hallucinations of my family members saying things to me that they weren't, and the hallucinations were in their tone of voice and mannerisms. I would see their mouths move to what I thought they were saying as well. It was impossible to tell what was real and what was not. I was completely paranoid and kept hearing them say negative things about me. This started a long process of having arguments with my family members about things they didn't say. In the midst of the experience, I was talking complete gibberish about esoteric ideas one might have during an acid trip, and how they related to subjects or ideas that had no connection to what I was saying, or to any conversation I was in the middle of having with my family. My family said that the things I was saying were so crazy that they couldn't describe it. The whole time I thought I was making sense. 9 to 10 AM. My memory at this point became so bad, and my body movements and language were so unnatural and disorganized, that my brother began to fear for his life. I was lost in a deep psychotic state. He told me afterwards that the look on my face was like that of the mass murderer James Holmes on one of his lineup photos. My brother armed himself with a knife because he didn't know what I was capable of. My mom was so afraid to enter the room I was in, she had to push my brother into it to deal with me. I don't remember much of what the actual experience of the mental state was, but I remember it feeling very much like what I think someone with schizophrenia or psychosis experiences. No way to differentiate what is real or not, and little awareness of one's actions, thoughts or words. I believe I was in a drug-induced psychosis. As far as the visual hallucinations, they were very similar to coming up on a shroom trip, with very wavy walls and moving objects, but the most profound part of the experience was the head state and the delusional and disorganized thoughts. 10 to 11 AM, finally I began to come down off the drug and could make more sense of reality, and my short-term memory came back. I gave up trying to talk to my family because I couldn't determine if they were really saying anything or not. I looked around my room and I had thrown medication everywhere. I'd urinated in a chair, on my bed, and on the carpet sometime during the night. I feel most sorry for my family, who had to watch me literally lose my mind, fearing that I might not ever be seen again. It took me nearly a week to recover. I was hallucinating for days. I would stop hallucinating for a little while and go to sleep, then wake up hallucinating again. Luckily, those hallucinations and the dissociative feelings went away after a week. I will never do DPH in high doses again, and I strongly recommend not trying this drug. In retrospect, the experience did give me great insight into what a schizophrenic or psychotic person experiences. It's as if the wires in your brain cross, and the processing of intercommunicating data in your brain mix up, and the resulting perceptual experiences and self-expression is idiosyncratic to your surrounding reality and the events taking place. So you're left saying things you think make sense and have meaning to people that don't exist. You're left hopelessly confused and convinced by the vivid hallucinations your mind validates. It's also left me with a great sympathy towards psychotic and schizophrenic people, because that state was hellish for me and for my family. This report was written by Cheshire and is titled A Night of Terror. I started off slow with 10 tablets. After about an hour or so, nothing happened. It was at this time that my roommate turned off the lights and went to bed, the only lights now being from the window and the computer. I took 2 more tablets and waited half an hour. Having read another report and computing the dosages taken, I took 5 more tablets. Then I lay down and waited for it to begin. My limbs were trembly and spasmed every now and then. Lying down was very uncomfortable. About half an hour later, the ceiling took on a weird gelatinous appearance, consistent with other reports. I then decided to get up and listen to a little music. I didn't hear any distortion to the music, but I could hear my name being called over it. After turning off the music, I turned to see a black woman in a cape and a large fur hat sitting next to my roommate. She explained to me that he was very sick and that she needed to heal him. She also told me not to be alarmed, so I turned back to the computer. This episode took about half an hour. At this point the trip turned nasty. I can't explain why, although I believe it might be because the additional 5 pills hit my system. I'm notorious for leaving dirty dishes in the room, and the light from my computer fell onto one of them, but it wasn't normal. It was moving. On closer inspection, it was filled with thousands of clear baby spiders. I screamed, but that was only in my head, as my roommate didn't wake up. Looking away, I tried to focus on the computer. I felt something brush my foot, but I didn't look down. However, I saw a flicker of movement near the edge of my desk. Slowly, what looked like a huge furry pipe cleaner rose up from the edge. It then tensed itself and pulled up a giant wolf spider. The body was about the size of my head, with gigantic legs. Looking away, I could see 4 or 5 more of them, all running very fast, like cheetah speed, along the floor. Gritting my teeth, I slipped on my shoes and ran very quickly outside my room. I was in the main hall of my floor, where it was considerably brighter. By now I was fully locked into a delusional reality. I went to the bathroom, nervously checking around for the spiders. Urination was painful but over quickly. I went to the drinking fountain, had a drink, and heard a growl from my left. There was this blue tabby cat with distorted features and big fangs. It growled at me, then ran very fast and leapt at me. I put up my arm and it exploded in midair. The fragments turned into long beaked flatworms with beady red eyes. They huddled together and shrilly screamed at me. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them they were gone. I couldn't stay in this hallway, but I was not going to go back to the spiders. I opened up my door a little and confirmed that they were still there. I decided to go into the main lounge of the building, into public, or at least public at 1:30 AM. Running down the stairs, I reached the lounge with no more events. I sat down for a moment because I was badly dizzy and my heart was racing. 3 people walked past and asked what I was doing. I said that I couldn't sleep and that I was down there to keep from waking up. Both my voice and theirs sounded hollow and echoey, and I was slurring very badly. They eventually gave up and walked away. I'm almost sure they were real, because closing my eyes didn't remove them, although that didn't remove the spiders either. I paced around the lounge for a while, but upon seeing a pair of spiders fighting, normal-sized ones this time, I quickly walked in the opposite direction. Little did I know that I was walking in the direction of the most horrifying hallucination yet. Reaching a series of benches, I was able to sit down when I suddenly saw movement. Under the bench, in the shadows, was a large bumpy shape. I moved a little to see what it was. I couldn't scream. It was a giant crab, about the size of my torso, including legs and claws. The claws were about the size of my arms and clicked together horribly. It had a pug's face with beady yellow eyes. One of the worms from before, now brown, protruded from the back of the shell. There were other, smaller, more normal crabs behind it. One of the claws would spasm from time to time. Although I had no grip on time, I must have stared at it, barely breathing, for 10 minutes or more. I ran full speed back to where the spiders were battling. It was then that I realised that one of them wasn't a spider at all. It was one of the worms. This time it was green, with thousands of gossamer thin legs that were used to spin silk into thin nets and lassos. I saw about 4 or 5 more of these worms through the course of my trip. I spent the rest of the night pacing back and forth between these 2 horrors until I could see the sun coming up outside. I then went back to my room where the spiders had disappeared and promptly went to bed. I can't remember if I dreamed or not. The next day I felt very fatigued. My arm shook like Parkinson's disease. I felt very sick to my stomach. No hallucinations persisted, although I had trouble balancing and sometimes seemed to slip when walking. these symptoms faded after a few hours. This report is titled Triggered an Alien Abduction and was written by Tinfoil Hats. Back in the day they made this DPH spray. Stupid idea knowing what DPH is. I was a kid with the worst sunburn ever, and I didn't understand that you could overdose on this stuff. I'd never done drugs before and probably didn't even understand what drugs were yet. The sunburn was infected and I had a fever. My whole back was ripped apart and leaking fluid, as were the backs of my legs, and I was in great pain. I did what the bottle said to do, applied it to the affected area, my entire back and legs, which were of course open wounds. After I finished I realised I'd gone through half the bottle just on my back. I had more DPH medicine though, so I dosed the syrup and the pills. Then I tried to sleep. At first my clothes were very uncomfortable, so I had to strip off, but the bedsheets still felt like they were cutting into the wound on my back, so I had to pull that off as well. When I was a kid, of course, I was afraid of monsters, but not just any monsters. Aliens were my monster of choice. Aliens, of course, really exist and aren't fake like all the other monsters, and they also like to abduct children and do terrible things to them, so it's good to be scared of them. Taking my covers and clothing off had removed my alien shield, since they obviously need access to my naked body if they're going to do experiments on me. I knew this, but I couldn't do anything about it since my clothes hurt so damned much to wear and even the sheets were unbearable. At this point the drug started to kick in. I did the smart thing and tried to rationalise that aliens didn't exist. I don't know how this stuff works, but at some point in my rationalisation I looked out of my open window to see very plainly that nothing was out there and nothing could get me. I was feeling calm when a stereotypical grey alien suddenly opened its eyes. It's like I was looking at him the entire time, but not seeing his face because his eyes were closed. I exploded from the bed and ran down the hall, naked, screaming. My parents burst out of their room and they started screaming, and I was screaming, and they screamed something at me about what happened, and I screamed back, "The Greys." I should mention that I can't remember how old I was, but I was certainly too old to be running down the halls, screaming whenever I got scared. This wasn't fear, it was a panic reflex. After that I went back and fell asleep. I woke up paralysed. I think I must have sleep apnea or something, but I never got that stuff checked. Waking up with sleep paralysis in the middle of a delirium is not fun. I was convinced the aliens came back and abducted me, and I couldn't move or speak save for a thin, raspy, repeated "help me, wake me up" during all of it. They came to my room and I saw them at the foot of my bed. I never saw the ship because I told them with my mind that the reason humans were always scared of them was because of an inbuilt thing in their psyche that made us frightened of all other humanoid species. I told them to look at human-on-human conflict. I also told them that I was not trying to be rude or mean, and they weren't disgusting to behold, just they were scary to me. I told them the paralysis made it even worse. The aliens were very nice, and they told me they would put me to sleep, so I would know that I was being abducted and I'd be able to feel it, but I wouldn't be able to see them. My eyes then closed and I could feel them touching me and injecting me in my chest with a long needle, and it hurt so bad that I scrunched up my eyes, so they were closed even more. When I did that, the aliens stopped injecting me for a second and I got really numb. I couldn't feel anything but their arms holding me down. I remained paralysed, but to pass the time and to try and break the obvious unreality of my horrible nightmare, I mentally counted the fingers on each hand grabbing me, figuring that if they had less than 4 then they couldn't be real, because they wouldn't have been able to hold things like needles. To my surprise, they were very long, nailless, and it seemed I could always feel at least 5 digits spread out palm flat on my chest, the needle in between them. I remember the hands were very firm and not soft at all, but they were also not bony. They were working hands, doctor's hands, my mind said. I remember that they never once grabbed me to hold me down, and I thought at the time that it would be awkward to make a fist with such long fingers. They always touched me with their fingers lengthwise. If they needed to hold my arm, it would be done at the elbow, with several fingers extended onto my bicep, and 2 fingers holding my forearm. I woke up in a violent seizure and more sleep paralysis. The sleep paralysis continues to this day. The sleep seizures continued for at least a week afterwards, every night, and they were always preceded by sleep paralysis and another abduction. Each abduction happened like the last one. The aliens came in around 3 AM. I stayed up for them because I was so scared. I could feel them coming. Suddenly fall asleep, then wake up. My eyes wouldn't open though, but I could feel them doing stuff to me. When they were done, they would leave about 5 AM, but it only felt like minutes. The seizure would then begin, and continue on. It seemed into daylight when I actually woke up. Today I sleep badly and I'm still scared of aliens. I also have this peculiar bump on my chest where I thought I'd been injected. It developed days after that initial abduction. I remember I thought there was a needle hole sealing up on top of it. During PE in high school, I got hit by a baseball in that exact spot. It became mysteriously infected despite the fact that there was no cut, and since my sunburn I haven't had another infection. I pulled a piece of metal out of it, but for some reason I imagined it had to be a piece of zipper embedded in my chest after the baseball impact, and I threw it away. To sum it up, I'm still not sure whether or not I was abducted by aliens. I've had problems sleeping since that day. My mind was seriously screwed for years afterwards, and I would keep on getting abducted until I passed puberty. I probably have some lingering psychotic effects, and occasionally I break into a state of mind which I would describe as a flashback. My face gets red and I start to think I'm tripping again. I then exhibit all the symptoms of schizophrenia in a short time span, and return to normal within half an hour. Even with my drug knowledge now, my experience with psychedelics, and as a sitter, I'd have to think very long about trying that stuff ever again. I do realise how batshit insane that story sounds. Taking a cataclysmic amount of a terrible drug when I was about 10 years old definitely coloured my perception of that night's event. I emphasise the fact that even now, I only know I must have been tripping because I took a huge amount of DPH and then was abducted by aliens. If the DPH bit didn't happen, the aliens would have seemed completely believable. So that's the end of the trip reports, and I hope you enjoyed hearing me narrate them. I think I've said this before, but I always find it fascinating how certain drugs can produce the same kind of hallucinations in multiple people. I read through a lot of DPH reports to make this video, and one common thing is that people often see these transparent spiders. I don't really know what the mechanism is behind this, it's just an interesting phenomena. I've looked a little bit into universal hallucinations, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of research on it. I know when talking about hallucinogenic plants, it's said that these universal hallucinations are the inner spirit of the plant. But when we're talking about chemicals like DPH, that explanation doesn't really work, so I don't know. Anyway, huge thanks to those supporting me on Patreon and PayPal. Your support allows me to talk about things like hallucinogenic drugs without worrying about being demonetized, so thanks to all of you. If you'd also like to help support content like this, then check out the link on screen now. I also have some other trip report videos on my channel. They should be on screen as well, so go check those out if you want to. Thank you for watching, and until next time, goodbye.